For my 30th birthday, my family gave me a self-help workbook about unlocking my potential. My brother got a check for $10,000 toward his new investment property. So I decided they were right. I changed direction. And by Sunday morning, I had 11 missed calls, a group text from my mom that said, "This is not the time for selfishness," and my brother's wife standing outside my apartment door holding a casserole dish like she'd never heard the word boundary before. Let me back up. The workbook was spiral bound, about 300 pages thick, with a woman on the cover in a beige blazer, holding a compass and gazing into the middle distance like she'd just discovered the concept of ambition. The title was Your Potential is Showing, a career pivot workbook for women ready to level up. Motivational fonts, pastel color-blocked chapters. A sticky note in my mom's handwriting on the inside cover that said, "We just want to see you reach your full potential, sweetheart. With love." I read the sticky note once, then I read it again. Then I set the workbook down next to my untouched slice of birthday cake, took a long sip of my sparkling water, and smiled at the table. Smiling is something I've gotten very good at. It's basically a survival skill in my family, right up there with staying 3 steps ahead of other people's feelings and knowing exactly how long you can sit in your own car in a parking lot before someone texts to ask if you're on your way. My brother, who turned 34 last spring, did not receive a workbook. My brother received a printed certificate from my parents, confirming they were co-signing on his new investment property, a duplex 2 towns over, that they'd apparently been discussing since September without mentioning it to anyone else at the table. My dad presented it folded inside a birthday card. When my brother unfolded it, my parents both leaned forward in their chairs like they were watching the climax of a film they'd already seen and loved. "Your future is happening," my dad said. He actually said that. My brother's wife squeezed his arm and said, "We're so grateful." She had not been involved in organizing tonight's dinner, for the record, or the last 4 dinners, or the birthday party for their youngest that I had spent 2 Saturdays building decorations for. I want to be very clear. I have a job. I am not unambitious. I am a licensed veterinary technician. I work at a small animal clinic, and I have for 6 years. I take x-rays. I draw blood. I monitor anesthesia during surgeries, and I sit on the floor of the recovery room with my hand on a dog's chest until his breathing steadies, because I want to make sure he knows he's not alone. It is not glamorous. My scrubs have seen things, but I am good at it in a way that matters. In the way that means something when a family brings in their 14-year-old cat who can't eat anymore and they need someone to hold it together long enough to hold their cat. My family referred to it as working at the animal place. Not a career, exactly. More of a phase. More of a, you were always the one who brought strays home explanation for why I hadn't figured out something more serious yet. My brother worked in commercial real estate. He had a LinkedIn banner that said Builder of Futures and used the word synergy without apparent irony. They were very proud of him. I had been the dependable one since I was about 16. Not because I was told to be, exactly, but because I was there. I noticed things. I was the one who remembered that my dad had a follow-up appointment and needed a ride because my mom's knee was bad that month. I was the one who stayed late at family dinners to help clear the table while my brother and his wife bundled their kids into the car and left before the dishes were done. I was the one who picked up my brother's son from school 3 days a week for almost a year because his wife had started a new job and, as my mom explained it, they're just in a transitional period right now and it would really help. I asked once what my brother was doing during the school pickup hours. My mom paused and said, "He's working, honey. He's trying to build something." I was also working. I was also building something. But I drove 40 minutes round trip to pick up my nephew from 2nd grade 3 times a week for 10 months. His wife, just so we're clear, was in that transitional period at a marketing agency 20 minutes from the school. The transition lasted about 14 months. My brother, whose office was across the street from the school, had back-to-back calls during pickup hours. Every day. For 14 months, no one ever asked him to adjust. Nobody paid me. Nobody offered. When I finally mentioned, gently, that gas was expensive and my schedule had started to suffer, my mom said, "We're family. We don't charge each other," which is a sentence that means something very different depending on which side of the favor you're standing on. By the time of my birthday dinner, I had also been the one driving my parents to their medical appointments since my dad had his minor cardiac event 2 years prior. Not every appointment, mostly the ones my brother was too busy for, which was most of them. My mom didn't love driving on the highway since her knee surgery. My brother offered to hire a car service twice, but it never materialized beyond the offer. I stepped in because it was easier than watching my parents navigate rideshare apps in their 60s, and because I genuinely didn't mind at first. I genuinely didn't mind a lot of things at first. Here's what happened at the dinner. My mom served pot roast. My dad made a toast. My brother's kids, my nephew who is 8 and my niece who is 5, sat at the kids' table in the corner, and at one point my niece climbed into my lap and told me my hair smelled like a puppy. It was a genuine compliment. I'd had a long shift. After the toast, gifts. My brother got the certificate. His wife got a spa weekend. My niece had wrapped a drawing for me in approximately 40 feet of tape. My nephew gave me a rock he said was magic. These were the only gifts that did not make me feel like I was being evaluated. Then my mom slid the workbook across the table. "We've been talking," she said, in the tone of someone who has been preparing for this moment, "and we just feel like you have so much more to offer. You're so smart. You're so capable, and we want to see you really investing in yourself." My dad nodded. "You've always been the one who figures things out. We just want that energy going somewhere." I looked at the cover. I looked at the compass woman. I looked at the sticky note. "We thought maybe it could help you think through a direction," my mom added. "Like a real career," my brother said, and then immediately picked up his fork like he hadn't said it. I smiled. I smiled and I said, "Thank you." And I ate my pot roast and I watched my dad refill my brother's wine glass twice before noticing mine was empty. When I got home that night, I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for a while, not crying, just sitting. I'd been doing that more lately, choosing my car as a sort of neutral ground where no one needed anything from me for 5 minutes. I thought about the workbook, about the compass woman in her beige blazer who had apparently figured something out. I thought about the $10,000. I thought about the 14 months of school pickups, the cardiologist in January, the gastroenterologist in March, the physical therapy intake appointment my dad kept forgetting to schedule and that I had eventually called about myself. And I thought about something my niece had said about 6 months earlier. She'd been sitting in my lap again during one of my brother's dinners, watching me read her a story, and she'd said, without any preamble, "I want to be like you when I grow up." And my brother had laughed from the kitchen and said, "Aim a little higher, bug." He was not being cruel. That was the part that made it worse. He genuinely thought it was funny. I sat in my car. I read my nephew's note about the magic rock. I thought about what potential actually meant, whether it was something you had to prove to the people who already decided what proof looked like, or whether it was something you got to define on your own terms. Then I went inside and I started writing some things down. Not in the workbook, in a regular notebook. I wrote down every recurring thing I was doing for my family that was not asked of me, not acknowledged, and not reciprocal, not in a bitter way, just to see it clearly. It took 2 pages. I sat with it for a long time. Then I wrote a second list, things I'd been putting off. A certification course I'd looked at twice and closed the tab on. A mobile pet care project I'd been sketching ideas for since the year before. A vacation I'd told myself I'd take when things settled down. Things did not settle down because I was the thing keeping them from settling down. I was the dam. Remove the dam and the water moves. I had confused keeping everything calm with being necessary. I was necessary. I just wasn't being treated like it. Over the next few days, I wrote some messages. Short ones, kind ones, no drama. I texted my brother and told him that starting the following month, I wouldn't be available for regular school pickups. I gave him 4 weeks' notice. I told him I loved his kids and I'd always be their aunt. But I needed my schedule back. I kept it casual. I kept it warm. I called my mom and told her I'd help coordinate their medical appointments going forward, but I couldn't always be the one in the car. I suggested we look at a few options together: car services, scheduling them on days that worked better for everyone. I said it gently. I said it once. I did not send a dramatic message. I did not call a family meeting. I did not reference the workbook, or the check, or the 14 months, or the 2 pages in my notebook. I just made myself a little less available, and I waited. It took 6 days. My brother called first. Not to discuss the school pickup message, he didn't bring that up at all, actually, but to ask if I could watch the kids Saturday because he and his wife had a work thing and his usual backup wasn't available. I told him I had plans. He said, "All day?" I said yes. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Okay, I'll figure it out," in the tone of someone who has not had to figure something out in a long time and is processing the novelty of it. His wife called 20 minutes later. She was very friendly. She asked how I was doing. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that they were in a bit of a bind on Saturday. I said I understood, and I hoped they found something. There was a longer pause. "Is something going on?" she asked. "No," I said. "I just have plans." "Okay," she said, in a voice that meant that was not okay at all. My mom called Sunday morning. She had heard about Saturday. Apparently, my brother and his wife had eventually asked my parents to watch the kids, which my parents had done, though my mom made sure I knew it had been a lot because my dad's hip had been bothering him and my niece was in a phase. "I just want to make sure you're all right," my mom said. "You seem different lately." "I feel good," I said. "You know your brother counts on you." "I know he does," I said. "That might be something worth examining." She moved past that. She asked about Thanksgiving, whether I'd be helping with the setup like usual. I said I'd be there, but I couldn't stay the whole day. I had some things I was working on. She asked what things. I told her I was looking into expanding my hours at the clinic and exploring a side project. She said that sounded nice, in the voice she used when something didn't sound nice to her at all. The Thanksgiving conversation ended fine. The one after did not. My brother had eventually hired someone to cover the school pickups, a neighbor's college-age daughter who charged $15 per trip. He mentioned this to me in a text with a laughing emoji, like it was a funny story about the inconvenience I'd caused. No acknowledgement that I'd been doing the same thing for free for over a year, just the laughing emoji. I did not respond to the laughing emoji. What I did do was register for the mobile veterinary care certification course I'd been putting off. It met on Saturday mornings for 8 weeks. The same Saturday mornings I used to spend at my brother's house because his wife had errands or a Pilates class or a brunch she'd booked 3 weeks out and forgotten to mention. I also started talking to a few colleagues about the mobile pet care idea, low-cost wellness visits for elderly pet owners who couldn't easily get to a clinic. House calls. Basic preventive care. I'd been turning this over in my head for 2 years and hadn't moved on it because I was tired on weekends, and my weekends weren't mine. My weekends were becoming mine. Thanksgiving came. I showed up. I brought a sweet potato casserole that I made from scratch, and my mom put it at the far end of the table and led with my brother's wife's store-bought rolls. And I watched my dad say, "These are fantastic. Have you always made these?" To my sister-in-law, who said, "Oh, I just grabbed them from the bakery." And he said, "You've got such great taste." And I took a long breath through my nose and reminded myself that I was here for the sweet potatoes and the kids and myself, not for the validation. After dinner, my mom pulled me aside to ask if I could come back the following Saturday to help her sort through the guest room closet. She'd been meaning to for months. I said I had class on Saturday mornings now and wasn't free until the afternoon. She said, "Class?" I explained the certification. She listened. Then she said, "Honey, you already have a job." I said I was building towards something. She said, "Just make sure you're not spreading yourself thin." I thought about that sentence for days afterward. For years, I had been spreading myself thin across their schedules, across my brother's childcare gaps, across every errand and appointment and family obligation that fell to me because I was reliable and nearby, and because nobody thought to ask if I minded. And the one time I started pulling that spread inward, toward my own life, the concern was that I might be overextending. I didn't say any of that. I smiled and I said I'd be careful. Then things escalated in a way I hadn't fully predicted. My brother's wife had apparently been venting to my mom about the Saturday situation, not just the one time, but the general pattern of my new unavailability. My mom had taken her side in a way I found out about through a text my mom sent to my brother that she accidentally included me on. It said, "She's being stubborn and I don't know why." She was always the easy one. I stared at that sentence for a long time. The easy one. That was what reliable looked like from the outside. That was what all those years of showing up had been filed under. A week later, my mom showed up at the clinic. I was in the middle of post-op monitoring on a beagle mix who'd just had a tooth extraction. One of my colleagues came back to tell me my mom was in the waiting room. I handed off the monitoring chart, washed my hands, and walked out in my scrubs with a faint smell of antiseptic and the particular exhaustion that comes from a full shift. My mom was sitting in one of the waiting room chairs, wearing her good coat, holding her purse on her lap, like she was prepared for a formal negotiation. I was in the area, she said, which was not true. I lived 40 minutes from their house. I sat down across from her. I waited. Your brother is struggling, she said. His wife is overwhelmed with work and the kids, and she's not getting enough support. They need the village. There it was. The village. I've given them a lot of village, I said. You've pulled back, she said, and the timing isn't good. I looked at my hands. I looked at the laminated poster on the wall about heartworm prevention. I thought about the 2-page list in my notebook. Mom, I said, I've been driving you and Dad to appointments since January of last year. I've been doing school pickups for 14 months. I've been at every family thing, every birthday, every dinner. I've been available every time someone needed me. And when I say I need my Saturdays back, the conversation is about my brother being overwhelmed. She blinked. We appreciate everything you do. No? I said, not unkindly. You expect everything I do? Appreciating it would look different. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, You've changed. I've made some adjustments, I said. I still love you. I still love them. Nothing about that has changed. She left not long after. We hugged. It was a stiff hug, the kind you give when you haven't finished being upset but you're out of things to say. The weeks after that were quiet in the way that felt more like a held breath than peace. My brother and I didn't talk for almost 3 weeks. When we finally did, at a family dinner my mom had orchestrated, he sat across from me and said, almost casually, So you're just done helping out? I'm not done, I said. I'm just not on call. It's not like we're asking for much, he said. You've been asking for a lot, I said. For a long time, and I gave it. And now I'm making some different choices. His wife was looking at her plate. Where was this 2 years ago? He said. I almost laughed. 2 years ago, I was picking up your son from school 3 days a week. He didn't have an answer to that. He pushed his fork around. My mom changed the subject to the weather. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was cold, just because the air felt honest. Something else happened around then that I hadn't expected. I'd been posting a few things online, not about my family, nothing like that, just about the mobile vet care project, process updates. What I was learning, a few photos from the certification course, a video I made answering common questions from elderly pet owners about managing medication schedules at home. People responded in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not viral, nothing dramatic, just real. Other vet techs who'd had the same idea and didn't know where to start. Pet owners in their 70s who said they'd been putting off their cat's checkup because they couldn't get a ride. A veterinarian 2 counties over who reached out to ask if I'd thought about partnering with a senior living facility. I hadn't thought about it. I thought about it now. Within 2 months of finishing the certification, I had done 6 house calls. By spring, 12. I was doing it on weekend mornings and occasional evenings, building it slowly, carefully, around my clinic hours. I wasn't quitting anything. I was adding something that was entirely mine. My brother found out through my mom, who had seen my posts. He texted, "Interesting pivot." That was it. 2 words. I sent back a thumbs up. His wife, interestingly, texted a few days later. A longer message. She said she'd seen what I was doing, and she thought it was genuinely cool, and that she was sorry things had gotten tense. She said she didn't realize how much I'd been covering until she had to figure out coverage herself. She said it in that careful way people speak when they're admitting something that costs them a little pride. I appreciated it. I told her so. My parents came around more gradually. My dad started talking to me differently after I organized a house call for their neighbor, a woman in her 80s with a diabetic cat who hadn't been to a vet in 2 years because she couldn't drive. I arranged it. I went. I set the cat up with a monitoring schedule and called the neighbor the following week to check in. My dad heard about it from the neighbor herself at a block event, and something shifted in the way he spoke to me after that. He called one evening and said, without preamble, "Mrs. Holt told us what you did for her cat." I said it was no big deal. He said, I think it was. He didn't apologize for the workbook. He didn't say he'd been wrong. But he asked genuine questions about the project, real ones, and he listened to the answers. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years that wasn't about logistics. I don't want to tell you everything repaired itself perfectly, because it didn't. My mom still sometimes says things that land sideways, still sometimes frames things around what my brother needs, without noticing she's done it. The $10,000 was never mentioned again. Neither was the workbook, not by them. I brought it up once, gently, and my mom said she had meant it with love. I believe her. I also believe you can mean something with love and still be entirely wrong about it. My brother and I are in a better place than we were, partly because I stopped performing availability I didn't actually have, and partly because his wife, once she had to actually engage with childcare logistics without a default fallback, became a more present partner in their own household. I watched that happen from a distance, and I found it quietly satisfying in a way I chose not to mention to anyone. My niece still asks to see me. When I show up for things now, I show up because I want to be there, and I think she can feel the difference. She asked me recently what I did at work, and I explained the house calls, and she asked, "So you're like a doctor for animals who can't go outside?" I said something like that. She said, "That's actually really important." She's 5. She meant it completely straight. It has been almost 2 years since the birthday dinner. I still work at the clinic. I also have a small mobile practice. It's not large, but it's real, and it's growing, and it's entirely mine. I have a website. I have a wait list for new clients. I hired an assistant last month, a pre-vet student who is enthusiastic about cats in a way that makes me feel understood. I still wear scrubs with paw print patterns. I still have a collection of stuffed animal anatomy models I use to explain procedures to nervous pet owners. I still go home some nights with the particular smell of a long shift and a deep, specific tiredness that means I used myself well. Nobody in my family calls it the animal place anymore. Not to my face, at least. I suspect my mom still says it to her friends sometimes, and I've decided I don't need to manage that. What I know is this. I was never the unfocused one. I was never lacking potential. I was the person who made everything work for everyone else, quietly, for years. And then I stopped being quiet about it. And then I stopped making everything work for everyone else. And then I started building something that actually belonged to me. The workbook is on my bookshelf, still in its original condition, because I never once opened it. I keep it there, not out of bitterness, not as a joke exactly, but because sometimes it's useful to have a physical reminder of the moment you stopped apologizing for who you were and started deciding what came next. The compass woman on the cover looks determined. So do I. The difference is, I know where I'm going. So let me ask you something, because you made it this far, and that means something. Have you ever been the one who handled everything for so long that people stopped noticing you were handling anything and only recognized you existed when you stopped? Tell me in the comments. And if any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever had to choose your own life over being someone else's convenience, hit like and subscribe. I'm Chloe, and I'll see you in the next one.